Hello, this Mr. Cope video looking at Fox Animation Studios in Arizona was sponsored by Chris over on Patreon. If you want to show your support and possibly suggest some video ideas of your own, guaranteeing their spot on the schedule, just visit my Patreon. Link is in the description. And now, on with the show. Shortly after the monumental success of The Lion King, quite a few studios had dollar signs in their eyes about the prospect of having an animated blockbuster of their own, with Warner Brothers and DreamWorks spending millions to build their own animation units. One of the studios most keen on jumping on that was 20th Century Fox. They made the curious decision of opening a studio in Phoenix and hired Don Bluth and Gary Goldman to head the creative side of the division. Their first project? An animated musical inspired by the Grand Duchess Anastasia of Russia. Now let's ignore for a moment that maybe it's a little distasteful to make an animated fantasy musical surrounding the execution of the Romanov family. Fox and Don Bluth more or less tried to compete with Disney during their Renaissance by making a Disney Renaissance movie. There's a story about how, when Thumbelina was being test screened, Warner Brothers did an experiment where they put the Disney logo in front of the movie to see how different the reaction would be. Anastasia could have opened with that famous castle and it would not have looked out of place. The spunky independent princess, the comic sidekicks, the Broadway-style musical numbers, the villain, just the entire way the plot is structured is derivative of the Disney animated films of that era. Now, those aren't necessarily bad things, as it's all about the execution. My main issue of Anastasia is I don't think the main character is particularly interesting, and thus the story meanly chugs along as it checks off all the boxes. By building a new studio, Fox and Bluth could have used the opportunity to make something daring, especially when tackling this story. That's how Bluth began his solo career away from Disney, with films like The Secret of NIMH and An American Tail. Everything about Anastasia feels market-tested. It's not enough that Rasputin has been turned into a wizard man who finds himself singing with bugs and has his limbs falling off. We have to give him an annoying bat psychic who just spouts unfunny wisecracks. Rasputin himself only really exists in this movie because they need another conflict beyond is she the real Anastasia, and an excuse for action scenes with monsters. Despite those issues, Anastasia does excel in two aspects. It is a beautifully animated film, and while I've never been fond of Don Bluth's human designs, the animators nonetheless did an exceptional job on the protagonist as well as portraying Rasputin's falling anatomy. The various backgrounds of the Russian cities, palaces, and countrysides are splendidly drawn, as is Paris. There are multiple still shots in Anastasia that are quite magnificent. The other excellent aspect of the production is the soundtrack. The songs by Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens are all wonderful, each befitting the scenario. Once Upon a December is haunting, Journey to the Past is triumphant and optimistic, and In the Dark of the Night is a terrific villain song. A Rumor in St. Petersburg especially has the right bombast to it, and I also have to commend David Newman's score, which complements the songs perfectly. It does not surprise me one bit that Anastasia made its way to Broadway. Curiously, the stage version omits Rasputin and Bartok, instead focusing squarely on the central Anastasia imposter plot, as the show represents a lot more of Flaherty and Ahrens' personal vision. I am surprised Fox has not followed in Disney's footsteps and announced a live-action movie. Considering Anastasia does have a nostalgic following, it would probably do decent business. Personally, I just find Anastasia to be an average run-of-the-mill animated musical, but it does have its charms, again, mainly the songs. For their next film, Fox and Bluth decided to go as far away from Disney as possible, and the result was a science fiction tale called Titan A.E. From the outset, the film establishes its tone pretty quickly, when it begins with humans evacuating Earth and aliens destroying the planet. The most impressive element is the world building, as the film does a decent job of establishing the stakes and this future where humans and aliens coexist. The designs on the aliens are creative enough that they're more engaging than the human leads, though I wish the villains were a bit more interesting. In many ways, Titan A.E. is reminiscent of Don Bluth's arcade games, with its characters jumping and running through a series of obstacles. The film attempted to mix hand-drawn characters with computer-animated backgrounds a few years before Treasure Planet attempted something similar, and while the effects aren't amazing, it's a noble effort. Joss Whedon had a hand in the development of the screenplay, and some of his voice comes through, although the biggest problem with Titan AE is how thinly written the characters are. Kale is the standard hero, Akima is the standard love interest, you've got the obvious villains. The movie follows pretty closely the science fiction playbook. While the action scenes are decently done for the most part, the end of the film does descend into things exploding and blasters firing, and I'm not entirely invested in the leads to care. However, as flawed as Titan AE is, it at least presented Don Bluth with a rare opportunity of not aping the Disney formula. The film was ultimately a massive box office flop that shut down Fox Animation Studios Arizona, but it did show Fox and the studio's head Bill Mechanic were confident in them doing more than just family musicals. What would the studio have made had Titan AE been a success? Well, most interestingly, they were planning an animated film based on the book Barlow's Inferno. So the studio was going to continue tackling darker material, and it's a shame that never came to be. Don Bluth was also set to direct a film about the Ice Age, which was of course eventually made by Chris Wedge at Blue Sky Studios. In the end, while the few productions completed by Fox Animation Studios were not the best animated films in my opinion, it was still a division filled with talent and was a noble attempt at jumping into the animation game. See you next time.